Have you ever felt that creeping sensation? The one that whispers something's not quite right, just as the world around you slips into darkness? That icy tendril of unease, that's the constant companion when I revisit the memory of my 19th birthday. Forget the streamers and forced smiles of childhood parties, because this particular birthday gifted me something far more potent. Raw, unfiltered brush with the kind of fear that burrows under your skin and stays there. What began as a simple, almost rebellious night out with friends, a quest for low-key fun, mutated into a heart-stopping plunge into the unknown, a chilling reminder that sometimes the shadows conceal more than just the absence of light. Are you brave enough to walk with me back into that darkness? To feel the chill of that summer night and face what we found lurking in the woods? Then keep listening, because this is a ride you won't forget, even if you desperately wish you could. Birthdays and me? We've never exactly been simpatico. The forced exuberance, the expectation of joyous fanfare. It always felt a little performative, a bit much. I'm just not wired for the spotlight, for the orchestrated revelry. My friends, the ones who truly knew me, they understood this unspoken aversion. They weren't expecting a raucous club crawl or a keg-fueled house party when my birthday rolled around. Instead, the usual playbook involved something subdued, comfortable. Maybe a quiet dinner with my family, a casual hangout with a couple of my closest confidants. Understated, uncomplicated. That was my birthday sweet spot. But this particular year, 19 years young and teetering on the edge of proper adulthood, even my carefully curated low-key birthday blueprint took a sharp, unexpected turn. And let's just say, the upgrade wasn't exactly the celebratory kind. It was July, midsummer, the kind of oppressive heat where the air itself seemed to vibrate with stagnant energy. I just endured, and I use that word deliberately, a perfectly adequate family birthday dinner. Polite small talk about college plans, a supermarket cake swimming in sugary frosting, the annual rendition of Happy Birthday that, year after year, managed to straddle that bizarre line between heartwarming family tradition and utter, soul-crushing embarrassment. As soon as I could politely excuse myself, I retreated to the sanctuary of my room. Barely had my backside hit the worn fabric of my desk chair when my phone buzzed, a persistent tremor against the wood. Group text. Jay, Carl, and Joey. My nucleus. My partners in slightly questionable, often hilarious, always memorable adventures. Jay's text exploded onto my screen first, a digital shout in all caps, "Wyo, birthday dude," followed by an arsenal of fire emojis that practically burned through the glass. What you up to? Please tell me you're not actually being responsible on your 19th? His personality, always a blend of restless energy and a healthy dose of charming recklessness, practically leaped off the screen. Carl, the resident instigator, chimed in seconds later, his message dripping with teenage bravado. "Yeah, man, ditch the rinse. Time to actually celebrate. But you know, cool kid style. No geriatric bars, we're still tragically under 21. Carl, the comedian of our group, always ready with a sarcastic quip and a mischievous grin, adding his signature brand of irreverent humor to the mix. Then came Joey's suggestion, succinct and laced with an almost childlike enthusiasm. Night off-roading? State park? Jeep adventure for the birthday king? Joey, the dreamer, the one always brimming with spontaneous ideas, his texts often punctuated with question marks and exclamation points, a whirlwind of impulsive energy bottled in digital form. Night off-roading. The words hung there, shimmering on my phone screen. That actually sounded kinda compelling and decidedly different. Definitely not adhering to my usual low-key programming, but birthdays were supposed to be a little amplified, right? A touch of the unexpected. And besides, these guys, they got me. They wouldn't propose anything genuinely insane, nothing that would veer into truly mortifying territory. They knew my boundaries, even if they occasionally enjoyed nudging them. State park? I thumbed back a reply, a hesitant question mark trailing my words. Isn't that like wildly illegal after dark? My fingers typed before my brain could fully catch up, a flicker of curiosity already igniting in my mind. Jay, predictably, fired back an instant retort, a digital shrug of pure teenage nonchalance. Technically, yeah, but, like, details. Who actually cares? The place is colossal. Nobody's ever out there past sunset. Plus, and then, the clincher, the trump card in any argument involving questionable activities, Jeep, trails, birthday memories, my friend. He had a point. Damn it, he had a point. Jay's Jeep. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was practically a fourth member of our crew, a weathered, rumbling testament to countless half-baked adventures and spontaneous escapades. Beat up, scarred with the badges of a life well lived, and possibly slightly abused. Its faded paint job and perpetually dusty interior told tales of mud-soaked trails and sun-drenched road trips. But it was a beast, capable of handling anything we threw at it, a symbol of our youthful invincibility. And the state park he was referencing? Man, it was legendary in our local lore. A sprawling expanse of untamed wilderness, crisscrossed with miles upon miles of trails, mostly intended for daytime hikers and bikers, but whispers persisted of certain trails wide enough to accommodate off-roading vehicles. Even if venturing onto them after dark was decidedly forbidden, that tiny, rebellious thrill, the illicit whisper of forbidden, started to prickle at the edge of my consciousness. And if I was being brutally honest with myself, the image of just escaping into the woods with my best friends, a refuge from the mundane, the expected, the parental, it held a potent, almost magnetic allure. Okay, I typed back, a reluctant grin spreading across my face despite my initial reservations. Count me in, you maniacs. But if we end up in handcuffs, I am officially blaming all three of you. I hit send, a sense of giddy anticipation bubbling up, chasing away the lingering birthday bloss. Deal. Jay's reply was instantaneous, brimming with digital glee. 9 p.m. sharp? My fortress of solitude? Jay's ironic nickname for his perpetually messy, perpetually welcoming house. Be there, or be square. I shot back, already feeling a surge of something akin to genuine excitement. Maybe, just maybe, birthdays could be a little more than just obligatory politeness. Maybe they could even be fun. By the time 9 o'clock rolled around, the summer evening was clinging to the last shimmering threads of daylight. Not quite pitch black, but a velvety twilight had descended, casting long, indistinct shadows that stretched and danced across the landscape. Pulling into Jay's driveway, I saw his Jeep already rumbling gently, a low, throaty growl that vibrated through the stillness of the evening. Its headlights, twin beams of warm yellow, sliced through the deepening dusk. Peering inside, I could see Carl and Joey were already ensconced in the back seats, the air inside the vehicle heavy, almost viscous, with the unmistakable, pungent aroma of, well, let's just politely say, Carl had arrived prepared for the celebratory mood. And Joey, bless his enthusiastic, slightly reckless heart, was cradling a handle of vodka like it was a newborn babe, a sacred offering to the birthday gods. 19, reckless, and convinced of our own immortality. That was the collective mindset in Jay's Jeep that night. Birthday overlord. Carl bellowed from the back seat the moment I slid into the front passenger seat. The Jeep's interior was a testament to its well-worn life, a chaotic tapestry of faded denim and spilled adventures. Ripped upholstery sagged like weary smiles, a faint, comforting scent of motor oil mingled with the phantom aroma of countless drive-through meals past, and a general, indefinable layer of stuff coated every surface. Old fast food wrappers crumpled in the door pockets, a rogue baseball cap lay abandoned on the dashboard, and a scattering of CDs, relics of a bygone musical era, littered the floor. But it was Jay's Jeep. It was our mobile sanctuary, our rolling clubhouse, the epicenter of countless late-night drives and ill-advised schemes. It was, in its own gloriously messy way, perfect. Happy birthday, man, Joey slurred slightly, his words already softened around the edges by the anticipatory sips he'd taken from his vodka bounty. He extended the handle towards me with a flourish. Hair of the birthday dog? Nah, I'm good, I chuckled, waving away the offering with a shake of my head. Driving tonight, Jay, right? I asked, glancing over at our designated captain of questionable decision-making. Jay nodded, his eyes already gleaming with that familiar spark of mischievous intent, the telltale sign that he was about to embark on something gloriously illicit. Someone's gotta keep our collective asses out of jail. Plus, he added with a sly wink, designated driver gets absolute veto power over the music selection. A collective groan rumbled from the back seat, a unified protest against Jay's notoriously eclectic musical preferences. His playlists were a bizarre, unpredictable menagerie of genres, ranging from obscure 80s synth-pop to heavy metal anthem, often interspersed with inexplicably random polka tracks he'd unearthed from the depths of some digital music abyss. But tonight, musical taste was, shall we say, decidedly low on the list of potential hazards. Our destination, the state park, loomed large in our collective imagination, a landscape of shadows and whispered legends, and Jay's questionable music was the least of our impending adventures. The drive to the park unfolded in a haze of juvenile humor, off-key sing-alongs to whatever musical oddity Jay had inflicted upon us, and the steadily intensifying, almost hallucinogenic aroma of weed emanating from the back seat. Carl, a master of his craft, had meticulously rolled a joint the size of a small cigar, a verdant, fragrant monument to teenage indulgence, and was passing it around the Jeep with an almost religious reverence. Joey, meanwhile, remained steadfastly committed to his vodka soda, refilling his plastic cup with generous pours from the handle, each clink of glass against glass a small, celebratory chime. Even Jay, usually stoic behind the wheel, was humming along to the current pop atrocity assaulting our eardrums, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the steering wheel. I simply leaned back against the worn fabric of the seat, letting the warm summer night air whip through the open windows, a foolish, carefree grin plastered across my face. This right here, this was exactly what I needed. No forced festivities, no awkward small talk with relatives, just my best friends, the promise of open wilderness, and a healthy, probably irresponsible, dose of youthful recklessness. As we neared the park entrance, however, Jay's casual demeanor subtly shifted. The easygoing laughter faded, replaced by a flicker of focused concentration. The music volume dipped lower, as if in deference to the impending clandestine operation. "All right," Jay announced, his voice dropping to a mock-serious whisper, the tone of a seasoned commando briefing his troops before a covert mission. "Operation Sneak into State Park After Dark is officially a go. Remember the sacred plan?" The plan, if you could even dignify it with such a grandiose term, was breathtakingly simple, bordering on the ridiculously naive. The park entrance, as Jay had explained, was theoretically closed after sunset, a fact conveniently signaled by a row of flimsy orange traffic cones strung across the asphalt. However, according to Jay's previous, somewhat less than legal, scouting missions, the night security presence at the state park was, to put it kindly, minimal. Translated, a few half-hearted cones and absolutely no actual humans patrolling the premises. Basically, a row of plastic obstacles and the sheer, unfounded faith in park regulations were all that stood between us and our off-roading fantasy. And those cones? Pathetic, easily circumvented, practically begging to be relocated. Jay expertly guided the Jeep to a discreet pull-off a short distance before the official park entrance, then cut the engine and plunged us into relative darkness by extinguishing the headlights. The only illumination now emanated from the sliver of moon hanging low in the inky sky, a faint, ghostly crescent, and the muted glow of the dashboard instruments. The woods on either side of the narrow road seemed to coalesce, to press in around us, their branches interwoven overhead like skeletal fingers, whispering secrets in the rustling leaves, secrets that felt both alluring and vaguely ominous. "All right, people, eyes and ears engaged," Jay murmured. His voice suddenly hushed, imbued with an almost theatrical air of espionage. He shifted the Jeep into neutral, and a shared wave of nervous anticipation washed over us. We all fell silent, instinctively adopting the hushed tones of co-conspirators, straining our senses, hyper-alert to any sound that might betray our impending illicit entry. The rustle of leaves in the light breeze, the distant chirp of crickets, the faint, rhythmic pulse of our own blood in our ears. These were the only sounds that punctuated the heavy silence. No approaching headlights on the road, no telltale crackle of a police radio, no unwelcome sign of law enforcement presence. Just silence and shadows. Coastal airspace is clear, Carl declared in a low, conspiratorial tone from the back seat, his voice muffled slightly by the joint still clutched between his fingers, its cherry glowing like a tiny, clandestine beacon in the darkness. Jay nodded slowly, deliberately, his brow furrowed in mock concentration. He eased the Jeep forward, inch by agonizing inch, creeping closer to the orange barricade that marked the park's nighttime frontier. And there they were, the pathetic sentinels of park regulations, lined up like a row of oversized, fluorescent carrots, their flimsiness almost comical in the face of our impending vehicular assault. He brought the Jeep to a final, silent stop just short of the cones, shifted into park with a barely audible click, and with a quick, almost whispered, "Be right back," he unbuckled his seatbelt, slipped out of the Jeep, and melted into the deepening shadows for a few heart-stopping seconds. We watched him, our breath held captive in our lungs, our eyes glued to the dark silhouette of his form as it moved furtively towards the cones. Time seemed to stretch, to distort, each second amplified by the rising tide of nervous excitement and the undercurrent of potential consequences. Then, just as quickly as he'd vanished, he reappeared, materializing from the darkness with a triumphant grin illuminating his face. The orange cones now lying scattered haphazardly by the roadside, defeated and ignominiously overthrown. "Piece of birthday cake," he whispered in mock James Bond tones as he scrambled back into the Jeep, sliding back behind the wheel. He shifted the Jeep back into drive, his movements imbued with a renewed energy, a surge of adrenaline. He eased the Jeep around the vanquished cones, and just like that, we were in, past the flimsy barrier of park rules, beyond the point of conventional teenage behavior, deep into the forbidden territory of nighttime state park trails. A collective thrill, a nervous flutter of pure, unadulterated excitement, surged through the Jeep's cabin. This wasn't just bending the rules. This was gleefully shattering them. This was pushing boundaries. This was undeniably, deliciously fun. Once beyond the now-breached entrance, we found ourselves navigating a narrow, paved one-way road, snaking its way deeper and deeper into the park's shadowy interior. Towering trees, ancient and imposing, crowded the roadside, their branches reaching out like gnarled arms, intertwining overhead to form a dense, verdant tunnel that swallowed the last vestiges of ambient light. The woods, no longer distant and mysterious, now pressed close, almost claustrophobically so, the air growing perceptibly cooler, heavier with humidity, imbued with the earthy scent of pine needles, damp soil, and something indefinably wild. The paved road, initially reassuring in its familiarity, stretched on for what felt like an eternity, a seemingly endless black ribbon unwinding through the encroaching wilderness, finally yielding to a large, open expanse, the parking lot. But unlike the daytime bustle and cheerful chaos of a park parking lot, this one was starkly, unsettlingly empty, save for Jay's Jeep, a lone metallic island in a sea of asphalt and shadows. The lot was hemmed in on three sides by the imposing wall of the forest, the treeline a dark, impenetrable curtain, and on the remaining side by the ghostly shapes of baseball fields, their diamond surfaces reflecting the faint moonlight like pools of liquid silver, and a deserted playground, the swings hanging motionless, the slides silent, all frozen in the stillness of the night, ghostly relics of daytime recreation. The atmosphere felt isolated, ominous, eerily, profoundly alone. "All right," Jay announced, his voice echoing strangely in the cavernous emptiness of the parking lot, the sound bouncing off the silent trees like a disembodied whisper. "Trail. Time." He spoke with a newfound resolve, the playful conspirator morphing back into the confident leader, the one who knew the way, who charted the course, even if that course led into uncharted, potentially perilous, territory. He seemed to possess an almost uncanny sense of direction, a woodsman's instinct for navigating the wilderness, having, as he claimed, conducted numerous daytime reconnaissance missions to scout out the ideal off-roading routes. He confidently steered the Jeep across the vast, empty parking lot towards a barely discernible break in the solid wall of treeline, a darker gash in the impenetrable green that marked the trailhead, the portal to our illicit off-road adventure. But before plunging us headfirst into the suffocating darkness of the trail, he brought the Jeep to a final, resolute stop, cutting the engine once more. Silence descended yet again, but this time, it felt heavier, more pregnant with unspoken tension, broken only by the distant, melancholic hoot of an owl, a lonely sound that seemed to underscore our isolation. "Cops check. Round two?" Jay murmured, his voice more of an instinctive precaution than a genuine question. We all reflexively scanned the expanse of the parking lot, our eyes straining against the deep shadows, desperately searching for any telltale flicker of headlights approaching, any glint of reflective paint that could signal an unwelcome official presence. Nothing. Just the oppressive darkness, the rustling of leaves in the unseen wind, and the pervasive, unsettling feeling of being utterly, profoundly alone in the heart of the woods. "Lot's totally clear," I confirmed finally, my voice barely a whisper, as if afraid to break the fragile membrane of silence. Carl and Joey, their faces pale and strained in the dim dashboard glow, murmured their agreement, their eyes still darting nervously around the perimeter of the parking lot. Jay nodded once, decisively, restarted the Jeep's engine with a reassuring rumble, and slowly, cautiously, guided the vehicle into the gaping maw of the trailhead. The instant we entered the dense canopy of trees, the darkness became absolute, an almost tangible entity that seemed to press in on us, swallowing the Jeep, swallowing sound, swallowing light. Jay instinctively flicked the headlight switch to high beams, and suddenly, twin powerful beams of white light erupted from the front of the Jeep, tearing through the oppressive blackness, carving a bright tunnel through the dense vegetation, illuminating the narrow dirt path that lay ahead. The trail, ostensibly designed for leisurely hikers and intrepid mountain bikers, was, in reality, barely wide enough to accommodate the Jeep's hulking frame. Branches scraped against the vehicle's sides, leaves rustled against the windshield like whispered warnings, the undercarriage groaned and protested as we bounced and lurched over unseen rocks and gnarled tree roots. It was jarring, bumpy, claustrophobically tight, and undeniably, heart-poundingly exhilarating. "Hoo-hoo!" Carl yelled from the back seat, a whoop of pure, uninhibited teenage joy erupting from his lips, laughter bubbling up as the Jeep lurched violently to one side, nearly throwing him against the door. "This is legitimately awesome." "Easy there, Evel Knievel," Jay cautioned, his voice laced with a tense mix of amusement and genuine concern, his hands tight on the steering wheel as he wrestled with the vehicle's unpredictable movements. "Don't want to add any more battle scars to the old girl's collection." But even through his mock reprimand, a wide grin stretched across his face, the raw, visceral thrill of the off-road adventure clearly coursing through his veins. The trail twisted and turned with serpentine unpredictability, sometimes briefly opening up into small, starlit clearings, patches of ethereal moonlight filtering through the canopy, then plunging us back into the suffocating embrace of the dense woods, where the darkness felt almost sentient. The twin beams of the Jeep's headlights danced erratically across the trees, painting fleeting portraits of gnarled bark, tangled vines, and startled undergrowth, illuminating strange, unidentifiable shapes, casting long, spectral shadows that seemed to writhe and twist and morph in the inky blackness. The sheer bumpiness of the ride transcended mere discomfort, veering into the realm of the almost comical, transforming our illicit Jeep excursion into a bizarre, organic amusement park ride, a slow-motion roller coaster constructed of dirt, rocks, and the unpredictable whims of nature. Every sudden lurch, every jarring bump, every unexpected dip in the trail sent fresh waves of delighted laughter echoing through the Jeep's cabin, punctuated by startled yelps and muttered curses as we were thrown around like ragdolls. Carl, thoroughly in his element now, relit his prodigious joint, the glowing cherry pulsing like a tiny, incandescent heart in the deepening darkness, and dutifully passed it around the Jeep once more, a communal sacrament in our nocturnal adventure. The air within the Jeep's confines thickened, becoming hazy, almost dreamlike, a fragrant, intoxicating cloud of sweet weed smoke mingling with the damp, earthy scents of the forest, a heady cocktail of youthful rebellion and sensory overload. Deeper and deeper we plunged into the heart of the woods, further and further removed from the familiar world of streetlights and sidewalks, hurtling away from any semblance of civilization, guided only by the flickering beams of headlights and the insistent pull of teenage recklessness. The music, still Jay's inexplicably upbeat, undeniably cheesy pop mix, was gradually cranked up a notch, a defiant, almost absurd soundtrack to our increasingly surreal, increasingly illegal excursion. Just as we rounded a particularly sharp, hairpin bend in the trail, the path abruptly opened up into a small, unexpectedly flat clearing. A haven of relative stillness amidst the chaotic churn of the off-road trail. Jay, as if guided by an unspoken instinct, brought the Jeep to a complete stop in the center of the clearing, cutting the engine, silencing its rumbling protest. And then, with a final, deliberate click, he plunged us into absolute, unadulterated darkness by switching off the headlights. Silence. A silence so profound, so complete, that it felt almost tangible, a heavy, velvet curtain that descended abruptly, isolating us, cocooning us within its depths. The sudden cessation of the engine's rumble, the abrupt absence of the probing headlight beams, the cessation of the Jeep's jarring, bone-rattling motion. The combined sensory deprivation was disorienting, almost unnerving. For a fleeting, surreal moment, we simply sat there, suspended in the inky blackness, weightless, adrift, the only sound the faint, almost imperceptible static hiss emanating from the Jeep's speakers, a ghostly reminder of the world outside our immediate, darkened reality. Then, as if to gently break the oppressive silence, Jay reached out in the darkness and turned the music back on. This time significantly softer, a mellow, almost hypnotic beat filling the void, a subtle sonic backdrop to our clandestine woodland interlude. Joey, as if on cue, produced the vodka handle once again, its glass neck clinking softly in the darkness. We began mixing makeshift drinks in the inky blackness, the clinking of glass against glass the only discernible sound besides the muted music, a delicate counterpoint to the profound silence of the woods surrounding us. We talked, whispered, laughed softly, sharing stories and half-formed thoughts, the easy, effortless camaraderie of close friends amplified by the intoxicating blend of weed, vodka, and the potent, shared thrill of our illicit adventure. It was unexpectedly, strangely perfect. A perfect, if undeniably illegal, decidedly unforgettable, birthday celebration. And then, without warning, without preamble, it happened. Just as Carl, mid-sentence, was launching into a particularly rambling, utterly incomprehensible anecdote about something involving a squirrel, a mailbox, and a truly epic bike fail, the music seemed to falter, not skip abruptly, not stop completely, but rather soften, diminish in volume, as if an unseen hand had reached out and gently turned the master volume dial down, just for a fleeting, almost imperceptible second. Yet, despite its brevity, the subtle auditory anomaly registered. It registered with all of us, all four of us, in that uncanny, instantaneous moment of shared perception that sometimes occurs between people who are intimately connected, bound by shared experiences and unspoken understandings. Conversation faltered, hanging suspended in midair, unfinished. Laughter, moments before bubbling freely, abruptly ceased, dissipating like smoke in the wind. We all simply froze. Stillness descended, settling over us like a shroud. Did you guys just hear that? I murmured, my voice barely audible above the now faint, almost subliminal music, the words catching in my throat, laced with a sudden, inexplicable apprehension. Jay, his hand hovering inches above the volume knob on the Jeep's console, nodded slowly, his brow furrowed in a deep, almost instinctive, frown. Carl and Joey, in the back seat, were utterly motionless, transformed into frozen statues, their eyes wide, unnaturally dilated. peering intently out into the impenetrable darkness beyond the Jeep's windows, their bodies taut with an unspoken tension. Jay, his movements deliberate, almost ritualistic, reached out and turned the music off completely. The already profound silence instantly deepened, becoming heavier, more oppressive, now pregnant with a thick, suffocating unease. And it was in that suffocating silence, in the absence of all other sounds, that we heard it again. A sound, faint, almost ethereal, undeniably distant, yet there, undeniably present. A high-pitched, keening sound, almost like a scream, but not quite, lacking the raw, visceral intensity of human terror, more like a wail. A thin, reedy, unsettling sound that seemed to slice through the stillness of the woods, to vibrate in the very air around us, to burrow directly into the marrow of our bones. What the hell was that? Carl whispered, his voice tight, constricted, strained with a palpable tension that echoed our own growing unease. Did you guys definitely hear that? I repeated, my voice trembling slightly now, no longer just questioning, but tinged with a nascent fear that was beginning to bloom in the pit of my stomach. My heart, unbidden, started to pound against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden silence. All three of them nodded, their eyes wide with a dawning alarm, darting frantically around the Jeep's cabin, searching the oppressive darkness beyond the windows, instinctively seeking some visual confirmation of the unsettling auditory intrusion. Searching the blackness for something, anything. Sounded like screaming, Joey finally managed to utter, his voice barely above a trembling whisper. The bravado of moments before completely evaporated, replaced by a raw, almost childlike fear. Yeah, Jay agreed, his voice hoarse, his usual easygoing bravado stripped away, replaced by a palpable, unsettling unease. High-pitched, yeah, like an animal? Maybe. A female fox? I stammered, the suggestion feeling weak, almost pathetic, even as the words left my lips. I clung to the rational explanation like a lifeline, desperate to anchor myself to something familiar, something explainable, something normal. Foxes scream, right? That's a known fact. It's probably just a fox. Yeah, just an animal, making animal noises. In the woods, at night. Perfectly normal, perfectly mundane. But even as I voiced the explanation, the flimsy reassurance rang hollow, even in my own ears. And Jay, I could see in the dim dashboard light, was far from convinced. He reached instinctively for the headlight switch, his movements jerky, almost involuntary. With a sharp click, the Jeep's bright headlights snapped back on, twin, piercing beams of white light once again slicing through the oppressive blackness, tearing apart the shadows, illuminating the narrow dirt trail ahead. We all instinctively leaned forward, our bodies rigid with tension, our eyes straining, squinting, desperately searching the illuminated trail, scanning the shadows beyond for any visual confirmation of the unsettling sound, for any sign of anything. Nothing. Just the narrow dirt trail, bathed in the harsh white glare of the headlights, winding into the inky blackness that still lay beyond the reach of the light. Just towering trees lining the trail, their branches etched in stark relief against the darkness. Just dense, impenetrable bushes crowding the edges of the path. Just long, dancing shadows, playing tricks on our eyes, shifting and swaying in the light breeze. No foxes, no animals of any kind. Just nothing. Just the unsettling emptiness of the woods, illuminated and yet still profoundly empty. Nothing there, Jay said finally, his voice sounding strangely weak, deflated, the words trailing off into the silence. He let out a shaky, almost involuntary breath, the tension in his shoulders still palpable. Probably just a fox. Yeah, probably just a fox. Or something. He trailed off again, the forced reassurance in his voice even less convincing than my own feeble attempt at rationalization. And honestly, so was I. In the pit of my stomach, a cold knot of unease was tightening, a primal instinct screaming that fox was a woefully inadequate explanation for the sound we had heard, for the profound sense of wrongness that now permeated the air around us. But what else could it be? People? Out here? In the middle of nowhere? At this hour of the night? That seemed even less plausible, and frankly, even more profoundly unsettling than the possibility of a screaming fox. Let's just move, Jay said abruptly, his voice laced with a nervous urgency, breaking the strained silence. He reached for the gear shift, his movements jerky, almost frantic, putting the Jeep back into drive with a decisive click. Just in case. Yeah? He started driving again, slowly, cautiously, inching the Jeep further down the trail, away from the clearing where we'd heard the unsettling sound, as if physical distance could somehow alleviate the growing sense of dread that was beginning to creep into our souls. We drove in a strained, suffocating silence for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few hundred yards, the music still resolutely off, the tension in the Jeep's cabin so thick, so palpable, that it felt like a physical weight pressing down on us, threatening to suffocate us all. Every rustle of leaves in the wind, every sharp snap of a twig under the Jeep's tires, every sudden shadow that flickered at the edge of our vision, made us jump, made us flinch, made the collective knot of fear in our stomachs tighten another notch. The carefree, joyous atmosphere that had defined the beginning of our illicit adventure had completely evaporated, vanished without a trace, replaced by a creeping, insidious unease, a chilling premonition, a visceral sense that something was profoundly, irrevocably wrong. After what felt like a mile-long crawl, but was likely only a few hundred more yards down the winding trail, Jay, with a sigh of what sounded like both exhaustion and resignation, brought the Jeep to a stop once more, in another small clearing, this one slightly larger than the last. He kept the headlights stubbornly blazing this time, twin beams of defiant white light cutting through the surrounding darkness, establishing a small, fragile island of perceived safety in the vast ocean of shadows. "Okay," he said, turning to look at us, his face pale and drawn in the harsh dashboard light, his eyes reflecting a disconcerting mix of fear and forced bravado. "Okay, maybe it really was just a fox. Yeah, definitely probably a fox." He attempted to inject a note of resolute reassurance into his voice, but the words still trembled slightly, betraying the underlying fear that we all now shared. We all nodded, reflexively, almost desperately, trying to convince ourselves, trying to cling to the flimsy raft of rationalization, trying to push back the growing tide of unease that threatened to overwhelm us. Yeah, probably just a fox," I echoed, my voice even less convincing than Jay's, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Right?" Carl chimed in, forcing a laugh that sounded strained, unnatural, almost brittle. Just a really dramatic fox. Yeah, a method actor fox. Or something equally ridiculous." Joey, however, remained uncharacteristically silent. He just sat slumped in the back seat, his face ashen, his eyes still wide and unfocused, darting nervously around the periphery of the headlight beams, trapped in a silent world of his own mounting terror. Jay, with a sigh of resignation, reached out and turned the music back on, but this time even softer than before, a mere whisper of sound, barely audible over the rustling of leaves and the pounding of our own hearts. He fumbled for his half-empty vodka soda in the darkness, taking a long, shaky swig, the ice clinking faintly against the glass. We all instinctively followed suit, each of us reaching for our respective coping mechanisms, trying to regain some semblance of normalcy, some vestige of the carefree, reckless vibe we'd so carelessly embraced just moments before. We tried to talk again, to resume the interrupted thread of our birthday celebration, but the conversation felt different now, edgier, more subdued, laced with a forced cheerfulness that felt increasingly strained and artificial. Every now and then, someone would abruptly fall silent mid-sentence, their head cocked, their eyes narrowing, listening intently, straining to discern any sound above the barely audible music, above the rustling of leaves, above the frantic, thumping rhythm of their own blood in their ears. But somehow, miraculously, the relentless tension began to ease, just a fraction, just enough to allow us to breathe again, to function, to pretend, however feebly, that everything was still okay. The combined effects of the vodka and weed, bless their hazy, numbing properties, helped, dulling the sharp edges of our fear, pushing the memory of the unsettling scream, the creeping unease, further back into the recesses of our minds, temporarily masked beneath a thin veneer of forced normalcy. We even managed to crack a few nervous jokes, to laugh again, albeit a little too loudly, a little too hysterically, the laughter echoing strangely in the silent woods. At one point, Carl and Joey, in a moment of truly bizarre, almost surreal birthday cheer, spontaneously erupted into an off-key, completely unprompted rendition of Happy Birthday, singing at the top of their lungs, the incongruously cheerful melody jarringly out of place in the darkness, in the lingering shadow of fear. It was so utterly ridiculous, so absurdly inappropriate given the palpable, unspoken unease that still clung to us, that it actually, unexpectedly, made me laugh. A genuine laugh, if a slightly hysterical, slightly unhinged laugh. And then, inevitably, nature called. After consuming a frankly irresponsible quantity of vodka sodas in rapid succession, the physiological realities of liquid intake finally asserted themselves. Hey guys, I mumbled, interrupting Carl and Joey's impromptu, off-key birthday serenade, the cheerful melody abruptly cut short. Nature's calling. Gotta pee. A chorus of exaggerated groans and mock complaints erupted from the back seat, theatrical protests against the interruption of their bizarre birthday serenade. Seriously? Now? Of all times? In the freaking scary woods? Carl whined dramatically, his voice dripping with mock horror. Just be quick about it, okay? Jay said, his voice still laced with an undercurrent of nervous tension, his eyes constantly, restlessly scanning the dark shadows beyond the reach of the headlights. I chuckled, trying to feign a nonchalant air, attempting to dismiss the increasingly insistent little voice in my head that was now screaming, "Don't go out there! Don't you dare go out there! It's not safe anymore. It's not safe." "Relax, you guys," I said, forcing a casual tone as I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached for the car door handle. "I'll be right back. Unless, the foxes, or whatever get me." I stepped out of the Jeep onto the soft, yielding earth of the trail, and walked a few hesitant steps into the inky blackness of the woods, just off the immediate edge of the trail, seeking a modicum of privacy behind a particularly dense, thorny clump of bushes. The air outside the Jeep's perceived zone of safety was immediately, palpably different. Colder, damper, the chill seeping into my skin, my clothes, a stark contrast to the relative warmth of the Jeep's interior. The air smelled more intensely of pine needles and damp earth, a raw, primal scent that felt both invigorating and unsettling. The darkness beyond the reach of the headlight beams was absolute, impenetrable, a thick, velvety blackness that seemed to physically press in on me, suffocating the light, absorbing sound. Even the soft, muffled music from the Jeep now seemed distant, almost ethereal, swallowed by the dense, watchful woods. I began to relieve myself, focusing on the simple biological imperative, trying desperately to anchor myself to the mundane task at hand, to block out the insidious prickle of unease that still nagged at the edge of my consciousness, trying and failing, to ignore the increasingly insistent feeling of being observed, of being watched, of being, profoundly, terrifyingly, not alone. And then, I heard it again. Footsteps. Faint, almost whisper quiet, yet utterly unmistakable, coming from somewhere disturbingly nearby, just beyond the screen of bushes that offered my meager shield of privacy, deeper within the impenetrable darkness of the woods. Not animal paws patting softly on the forest floor, not the rustling of leaves in the wind-stirred branches overhead, but the distinct, soft, rhythmic crunch of boots, shoes, human footwear, deliberately placed on the fallen leaves and scattered pine needles carpeting the forest floor. Footsteps, close, uncomfortably, terrifyingly close. Too close. My blood instantly turned to ice. The nascent fear that had been simmering beneath the surface of forced bravado now erupted, surging through my veins like a jolt of pure adrenaline. The little voice in my head, no longer whispering, but screaming with primal urgency, shrieked, "Get back in the car! Now! Right now! Run!" Without conscious thought, without hesitation, I cut my business short, midstream, literally, abandoning all pretense of privacy or completion, and scrambled frantically back towards the faint glow of the Jeep's headlights, back towards the relative safety of the trail, adrenaline coursing through me in a cold, sickening wave. "Guys! Guys! Guys!" I hissed, stumbling back towards the Jeep, my voice a ragged rasp, laced with a genuine, visceral panic that I couldn't, and wouldn't, attempt to conceal. I practically clawed my way back into the car, slamming the door shut with unnecessary force, the metallic thunk echoing unnaturally loudly in the sudden silence. "Guys, I heard something. Footsteps. Out there. In the woods." My voice was shaking uncontrollably now, breathless with exertion and terror, the words tumbling out in a panicked rush. Jay and Carl and Joey all whipped around in their seats, their heads snapping towards me, their eyes widening in stunned alarm, mirroring the raw terror reflected in my own. "Footsteps?" Jay repeated, his voice barely audible, a strained, disbelieving whisper. "Like people footsteps? Human footsteps?" I nodded frantically, my head bobbing up and down in jerky, terrified affirmation, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, a frantic, wild drumbeat of pure, unadulterated fear. Yes, definitely footsteps. Real footsteps. Human footsteps. Close. So close. Just out there. Beyond the bushes. In the darkness. I gestured wildly, frantically, towards the impenetrable blackness of the woods, towards the unseen horrors lurking beyond the reach of the headlights. Jay reacted instantly, without a second's hesitation, his mind snapping into a mode of urgent, decisive action. He slammed the Jeep back into park, his movements jerky, almost violent, grabbed the headlight switch, his fingers fumbling for a fraction of a second, and with a sharp, decisive flick, plunged us all back into suffocating, absolute darkness. "Headlights off," he hissed, his voice tight, strained, barely above a whisper, imbued with a desperate urgency. "Everyone be completely silent. Listen. For Christ's sake, just listen." Silence descended again, even heavier, even more oppressive than before, a suffocating blanket of blackness and dread, broken only by the frantic, ragged pounding of my own heart, by the shallow, rapid, panicked breaths of my equally terrified friends. We all sat frozen, rigid with fear, straining every nerve, every muscle, every sense, listening with an almost agonizing intensity, waiting, our eyes wide, pupils dilated to pinpricks, staring blindly into the impenetrable darkness beyond the Jeep's windows. Waiting. Waiting for what? For the sound of footsteps to return? For the rustling of leaves to betray an unseen presence drawing closer? For something else entirely? Something far more sinister? Something far more real? Then, after an eternity of heart-stopping, breath-held silence, Jay, his voice a strangled, barely audible whisper, broke the oppressive stillness, his words laced with a chilling mix of fear and desperate, forced bravado. "Headlights back on, but just the regular beams, not the brights. Okay, and be ready to go. Just be ready to floor it. If we need to, you know?" He reached for the headlight switch again, his hand visibly shaking, trembling slightly in the darkness. He flicked the switch, and this time, he cautiously engaged only the regular, dimmer headlights, twin beams of softer, less intense light cautiously probing the blackness, casting a diffused, almost hesitant glow that barely penetrated the oppressive shadows. A beam of light that, as it slowly widened, illuminated something. Standing just a few feet in front of the Jeep, directly in our path, right at the very edge of the trail, just beyond the limited reach of the hesitant headlights, was a figure. A human figure. A person. Standing perfectly, unervingly still, facing directly towards the Jeep, their head completely obscured by a deep, enveloping hood, their face a featureless void, swallowed by shadows. A woman, or at least, we instinctively assumed it was a woman, based on the shape, the subtle suggestion of feminine build. But in the dim, diffuse light, shrouded in darkness, it was impossible to discern any definitive features. Just a dark, hooded figure, a silhouette against the blackness of the woods, standing there, utterly motionless, eerily silent, undeniably, staring directly at us. Jay and I, trapped in the front seats, our perspectives unobstructed, we were the first to fully register her presence. And we both, almost simultaneously, reacted in precisely the same primal, involuntary way. We screamed. Not loud, theatrical, Hollywood-style screams. Not hysterical wails of terror, but sharp, strangled, involuntary gasps of sheer, unadulterated terror, ripped from our chests, choked off abruptly in our throats, raw screams of pure, visceral shock. The sound, even in its muted, strangled form, echoed unnaturally loudly in the oppressive stillness of the woods, a jarring, unwelcome intrusion into the silent tableau of dread. The hooded figure, inexplicably, terrifyingly, didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't startle, didn't even betray the slightest flicker of movement, just remained rooted to the spot, standing there, utterly, unervingly motionless, silently, relentlessly, staring. It was profoundly unsettling, unbearably unnerving, terrifying in its utter passivity, like something ripped straight from the pages of a fever dream, a living nightmare materialized in flesh and shadow, a grotesque parody of human form, like a scene torn from the darkest corners of a horror film, like a chilling premonition made terrifyingly, inescapably real. Jay, his body still trembling, but adrenaline now surging through him, a frantic, desperate current overriding his initial paralysis of terror, somehow, miraculously, managed to claw his way back to a semblance of composure. He reached for the manual window crank, his hand shaking so violently that he fumbled for a moment, his movements slow, deliberate, cautious, as if afraid to break the fragile, terrifying spell that had been cast over us. He rolled down his window, slowly, agonizingly slowly, the mechanical whirring of the window motor sounding deafeningly loud in the oppressive silence. "Why you all right?" he stammered, his voice cracking, barely audible above the frantic, deafening pounding of my own heart, the words stumbling out, laced with a desperate, almost pathetic, plea for normalcy in the face of the utterly inexplicable. The hooded figure, impossibly, inexplicably, did not answer, did not speak, did not utter a single word, did not even make a sound, did not move a muscle, just continued to stand there, utterly, unnervingly still, silently, relentlessly, unnervingly, staring. Then, in a movement as slow, deliberate, and unsettling as her initial stillness, she began to back away, not running, not fleeing in panic, but simply retreating, backing away, step by agonizing step, moving slowly, methodically, almost mechanically, receding back into the dense, impenetrable darkness of the woods, disappearing silently into the shadows, swallowed by the blackness, until she was completely gone, vanished, erased from our reality as abruptly and inexplicably as she had appeared, as if she had never been there at all, a phantom conjured from the depths of our shared nightmare. It was in that precise, heart-stopping, utterly terrifying moment, as we collectively watched the hooded figure slowly retreat, to melt back into the oppressive darkness, leaving behind only the lingering residue of dread, that Carl, bless his utterly, gloriously stoned and profoundly vodka-soaked heart, Carl, from the back seat, finally, miraculously, managed to process the surreal, nightmarish events that were unfolding around us. And Carl, in his own uniquely unfiltered, hilariously inappropriate, and utterly terrified way, finally, audibly, definitively, delivered the single, chilling line that would forever be etched into my memory. The 7 words that irrevocably transformed our creeping unease into full-blown, pants-wetting, soul-shattering panic. "Guys," Carl whispered, his voice trembling, barely audible, yet somehow piercing through the suffocating silence, his eyes wide, unfocused, darting frantically around the Jeep's cabin, his gaze skipping nervously across the shadows that pressed in from all sides. "Guys, oh my God, guys, we're surrounded." And in that moment, spurred by Carl's chilling revelation, jolted by his simple, horrifying statement of fact, we finally, truly looked. We finally, truly saw. Not just at the narrow trail illuminated by the Jeep's hesitant headlights, not just at the immediate woods pressing in on either side of the path, but all around the Jeep, in a slow, agonizing, panoramic sweep of our terror-widened eyes, we scanned the darkness that encircled us, the shadows that writhed and pulsed in the limited light, and in the dim, diffuse beams of the headlights, in the deeper, more impenetrable shadows beyond, we saw them. Figures, more figures, dozens of figures, or perhaps not dozens, perhaps just a handful. In the swirling darkness, in the flickering, deceptive shadows, it was impossible to accurately count, impossible to quantify the extent of our terrifying encirclement. But they were undeniably there. Hooded figures, just like the first one, and the one at the back window, and countless others, lurking just within the tree line, just beyond the edge of the trail, partially obscured by the dense foliage, partially hidden behind the trunks of ancient trees, yet undeniably, terrifyingly, there. Definitely, indisputably, people, human-shaped figures, hooded figures, standing motionless, silent as statues, utterly, unnervingly still, all of them, without exception, undeniably, terrifyingly, staring directly at the Jeep, staring directly at us, trapped inside, in the middle of the woods, in the middle of the night, in July, hooded figures, on a warm, humid summer night. Their presence made no rational sense. Their silent, watchful stillness was profoundly wrong, deeply, unsettlingly wrong, a violation of the natural order, a transgression against everything we understood about the world. And then, as if to punctuate the chilling realization of our encirclement, as if to amplify the already unbearable terror that had consumed us, Carl, from the back seat, finally, completely, utterly lost it. He let out a scream, not just a frightened gasp, not just a nervous yelp, but a full-throated, ear-splitting shriek of pure, unadulterated terror, a primal scream of absolute, unmitigated panic. The sound, raw and visceral, ripped from the depths of his soul, echoed through the silent woods, a jarring, horrific cry that bounced off the trees, reverberated in the darkness, a scream that mirrored, amplified, grotesquely echoed, the unsettling, high-pitched scream that we had dismissed as a fox just moments before. The scream that suddenly, terrifyingly, irrevocably, made horrifying, chilling sense. Carl's scream jolted us, snapped us out of the frozen paralysis of terror that had gripped us, shocking us back into a semblance of panicked action. We all whipped around instinctively, our terrified eyes drawn, almost magnetically, to the back windshield. And there, looming just outside the rear window, mere inches away from Carl's petrified face, was yet another figure. A man. This time, undeniably, unequivocally, a man. Taller, broader-shouldered, a more imposing, more menacing presence than the hooded woman we had just encountered. Hooded, like all the others. But this one was impossibly closer. Close enough to reach out and touch the Jeep's cold metal skin. Close enough to potentially reach through the still-open window. To what? The weak red glow emanating from the Jeep's taillights, dim and diffuse as it was, cast an eerie, blood-red illumination across his face, highlighting his features in a grotesque, macabre light, illuminating him just enough for us to truly see. To see his eyes, dark and fathomless, reflecting the red light like polished obsidian. To see his mouth, set in a grim, unsmiling line. To see his expression, or rather, the utter, terrifying lack of expression. No emotion, no discernible feeling, no flicker of intent, just blank, utterly, terrifyingly empty, a deadpan, emotionless mask, staring impassively into the car, staring directly at us, staring through us, as if we were nothing more than transparent ghosts, insignificant specters in his path. That was it. That was the final, irrevocable breaking point. The moment when the last vestiges of rational thought completely dissolved, vaporized, consumed by the all-encompassing wave of pure, primal terror. "Get us the hell out of here!" I screamed, my voice raw, hoarse, barely recognizable, a primal yell ripped from the depths of my fear. No longer coherent words, just a desperate plea for survival. Just go. Jay, go. 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 And Jay, bless his reckless, resourceful, utterly terrified heart, Jay, who was still, miraculously, marginally more sober than the rest of our vodka and weed-addled crew, Jay, who somehow, against all odds, managed to cling to a single shred of rationality in the face of utter, overwhelming madness. Jay, he listened. He didn't question. He didn't hesitate. He didn't argue. He simply acted. He slammed the Jeep into drive with a violent, gear-grinding jolt, jammed his foot down on the accelerator pedal, and we lurched forward, the tires spitting gravel and dirt, careening wildly, uncontrollably, tearing down the narrow trail, away from the circle of hooded figures, away from the suffocating darkness, away from whatever unspeakable horror was unfolding in those woods. The escape that followed was a chaotic, nightmarish blur of motion and terror. The Jeep bucked and rattled violently, a mechanical bull gone berserk, the tires slipping and sliding on the loose dirt, spitting up rocks and debris, threatening to lose traction at every sharp turn. Branches whipped past the open windows like malevolent claws, scraping against the Jeep's metal frame. The undercarriage groaned and protested with every jarring bump, every teeth-rattling impact. The engine roared in strained protest, a mechanical shriek of exertion, as Jay pushed the vehicle far beyond its intended limits, demanding every ounce of power it possessed. We were tossed and thrown around in our seats like ragdolls, battered and bruised, whipped from side to side, clinging desperately to anything we could grab, seatbelts digging into our shoulders, hands white-knuckled around door handles and seat edges, screaming, yelling incoherently, praying to any deity that might be listening, begging, pleading, just wanting to get out, just wanting to escape the living nightmare that had enveloped us. The dirt trail, impossibly, agonizingly, seemed to stretch on forever, winding and twisting with malevolent intent, climbing steep inclines and plummeting down treacherous drops, a torturous, endless obstacle course deliberately designed to prolong our suffering, to amplify our terror, to crush our hopes of escape. Every sudden bump, every unexpected turn, every fleeting shadow that flickered at the edge of our vision sent a fresh, electric jolt of fear through us, each jolt more intense, more debilitating than the last. We kept desperately, frantically looking back, our heads swiveling around like panicked owls, searching the darkness behind us for any sign of pursuit, any telltale flicker of headlights, any ominous hint that the hooded figures were following, closing in, intent on reclaiming their terrified prey. But miraculously, blessedly, there was nothing. Just inky blackness receding behind us. Just towering trees blurring past in a dizzying rush. Just long, dancing shadows playing tricks on our exhausted, fear-addled eyes. No sign of pursuit. No indication that we were being followed. Just nothing. Only the overwhelming, bone-deep sense of dread. Finally, slowly, agonizingly, torturously slowly, the dirt trail began to level out. The relentless bumps and jolts began to subside. The trees started to thin out, their dense canopy gradually receding, allowing slivers of starlight to penetrate the oppressive darkness. And then, through the thinning trees, we saw it. A faint, ethereal glimmer of light ahead. A beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. A tangible promise of salvation. A distant, flickering promise of escape. And then, with a final, jarring lurch, with a triumphant roar of the Jeep's straining engine, we burst free of the woods, careening out of the darkness and onto the blessed, smooth, blessedly paved surface of asphalt. Another park exit. A different, blessedly empty parking lot. We were out. We were free. We were miraculously, unbelievably alive. Jay, his face ashen, his hands still trembling uncontrollably on the steering wheel, slammed on the brakes, bringing the battered Jeep to a screeching, tire-squealing halt in the middle of the deserted parking lot. He cut the engine, and this time, silence descended again. But it was different. Profoundly, fundamentally different. This time, it was not the oppressive, malevolent silence of the woods, but the blessed, liberating silence of relief. The silence of escape. The silence of survival. We all just sat there for a long, agonizing moment, suspended in the sudden stillness, gasping for breath like drowning men hauled onto the deck of a ship, our hearts still hammering against our ribs, our bodies trembling uncontrollably, our minds reeling, struggling to process the nightmarish events that had just transpired, desperately trying to make sense of the senseless terror we had just endured. No one spoke. No one moved. We were just there, breathing, alive, safe, and finally, gloriously, irrefutably, out of the woods. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jay, still pale as a ghost, still visibly shaking, but undeniably the most composed, the most functional of our shattered quartet, turned his head slowly, deliberately, to look at us in the dim, comforting glow of the dashboard lights. "Okay," he said, his voice hoarse, raw, barely more than a ragged whisper, the words thick with lingering fear and profound exhaustion. "Okay, that's officially it. We are going home. Right now. Straight home. No detours. No pit stops. Just home." He didn't phrase it as a suggestion. It wasn't an invitation to debate. It wasn't even a request. It was an order. A non-negotiable, absolute, unwavering command. And none of us argued. None of us even considered protesting. We simply nodded, mutely, numbly, gratefully. Home. Yes. Home. That was all we wanted now. Home. And safety. And light. And the blessed, comforting absence of woods. The blessed, liberating absence of darkness. The blessed, life-saving absence of them. Away from the hooded figures. Away from the silent stares. Away from the chilling scream that still echoed in our minds. On the long, silent drive back to civilization, the Jeep remained eerily quiet. No music dared to intrude upon the oppressive silence. No jokes were cracked, no off-key sing-alongs attempted. Just silence. Heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the monotonous hum of the tires against the asphalt, by the shallow, ragged, almost whimpering breaths of four profoundly terrified teenagers. We were all lost in the labyrinth of our own shattered thoughts, replaying the nightmarish events of the past hour in an endless, horrifying loop, desperately trying to make sense of the incomprehensible, trying to conjure some semblance of rational explanation for the irrational, soul-chilling terror we had just experienced. Were they just kids? Like us? Other teenagers, perhaps, also seeking illicit thrills in the woods at night? Were they just messing with us? Playing some kind of bizarre, deeply unsettling, borderline psychotic prank? Maybe that was it. Maybe that had to be it. The alternative, the unspoken, terrifying alternative, was simply too horrific to contemplate. But even the prank theory felt woefully inadequate. It didn't explain everything. It didn't account for the chilling, unearthly scream. It didn't explain the unnerving, uniform stillness of the hooded figures, standing motionless, silent as statues, watching us with those unnerving, unwavering stares. It didn't explain the terrifyingly blank, emotionless face of the man at the back window, illuminated by the ghostly red glow of the taillights. It didn't explain the chilling feeling of being surrounded, of being hunted, of being pursued by something other. And it definitely didn't explain the hoodies. Hoodies, in the sweltering heat of the middle of July, on a stiflingly warm summer night? It just didn't make sense. None of it made any rational, logical, explicable sense. And the scream, that haunting, high-pitched wail that still echoed in the chambers of my memory. It definitely wasn't a fox. We all knew that now. Deep down, in the cold, dark core of our shared terror, we all instinctively knew. That scream, it was intrinsically, undeniably, connected to them, to the hooded figures lurking in the darkness. Somehow, someway, it had to be, but the connection remained elusive, ungraspable, shrouded in the same impenetrable mystery that enveloped the hooded figures themselves. We never figured it out. We never unearthed a plausible, comforting, rational explanation for what we had encountered that night. We never spoke of it again, not in any detail. We never went back to those woods at night, never even idly mentioned the possibility of returning. Off-roading in the state park at night? Yeah, that spectacularly brilliant birthday adventure idea? Completely, utterly, and irrevocably retired. Some birthdays, you just never forget. And some memories, they just linger, clinging to the edges of your consciousness, haunting the quiet moments of your day, whispering insidious secrets in the dead of night, a constant, chilling reminder that sometimes the shadows hold more than just shadows. Sometimes, in the deepest recesses of the darkness, the shadows hold things. Things that watch, things that scream, things that silently, relentlessly surround you in the woods on a warm summer night when you foolishly believe you are utterly, gloriously, and naively alone. But you're not. You're never truly alone, especially not in the dark, especially not in the woods, especially not when they're watching, waiting, hooded, silent, staring from the shadows. And even now, years later, I still can't definitively explain who or what we encountered that night in the state park woods. Were they simply misguided pranksters, committed to an elaborate, deeply disturbing scare tactic? Or was it something else? Something ancient, something darker, something far more sinister lurking just beneath the veneer of our familiar reality? The questions, like shadows themselves, continue to linger, unanswered, unyielding, perpetually fueling a low hum of unease that inevitably surfaces every time I find myself venturing into the woods after dark. Every time the sun dips below the horizon and the familiar world around me transforms into something other. Perhaps, in the grand tapestry of existence, some questions are destined to remain unanswered. Some doors are wisely, instinctively, better left unopened. Some mysteries are best left shrouded in shadow. But the vivid, visceral memory of those hooded figures, their unervingly silent stillness, their relentless, empty stares, the chilling, unearthly scream echoing through the silent trees, that's a uniquely disturbing birthday gift that I'll likely be unwrapping in the darkest corners of my nightmares for many, many years to come. And sometimes, when the night is particularly quiet, when the shadows deepen and lengthen, stretching out like grasping fingers, I swear, I can still faintly hear that scream, a distant, almost subliminal whisper carried on the wind. And I can't help but wonder, are they still out there, somewhere in the woods, watching, waiting, patiently, silently, eternally, perhaps waiting for you? That night in the woods, that ill-conceived birthday celebration, irrevocably changed something within me. It served as a stark, terrifying reminder that the world we inhabit, the world we perceive, is not always bathed in comforting sunshine and carefree laughter. That beneath the familiar surface, a darker reality exists, realm of shadows and mysteries that we may never truly want to unravel. It was a birthday adventure twisted into a waking nightmare, a chilling, unforgettable encounter that still sends icy tendrils of fear snaking down my spine whenever I recall its unsettling details. If you felt that same shiver of unease, if this story resonated with the primal fear that lurks in the darker corners of your own imagination, then please, take a moment to hit that like button. Let me know in the comments section if you've ever had a similar brush with the unexplained, a moment that defied logic, a chilling encounter that left you questioning the very fabric of reality. And if you're brave enough to venture further into the shadows with me, if you dare to delve deeper into the realm of the unknown, then I implore you to subscribe to the channel, because believe me when I say, this chilling tale is merely the beginning. There are countless more stories waiting to be told, more nightmares yearning to be shared, more unsettling encounters lurking just beyond the veil of our comfortable reality. And trust me, you absolutely won't want to miss what comes next. Who truly knows what malevolent entities, what unseen horrors, what unimaginable terrors might be lurking just beyond the edge of our perception, waiting in the impenetrable darkness? Maybe, just maybe, if we share our stories, if we confront the darkness together, we can begin to understand the mysteries that surround us. Or perhaps we'll simply end up adding our own whispers, our own shadows, to the already vast, unknowable darkness. See you in the next story, if you dare to return to the shadows with me. And if you do, perhaps you'll be next to hear the scream.